Welcome to Eminent Psychotherapists Revealed, a product of Psych Incubator. We are very pleased to have as a new guest host, Dr. Jennifer Kelly. Dr. Kelly was one of our special guests a couple of months ago, and we're so happy, Jennifer, to have you join us as a co-host. You bring a lot of knowledge, expertise, and experience to this cast of characters, so welcome. And tonight, I am quite pleased to have as our special guest a colleague of, we were just talking about decades, Dr. Jay Lebow, who is a pioneer in family therapy, and I don't say that lightly. Dr. Lebow is a clinical professor of psychology at Northwestern University, as well as a senior scholar and senior therapist at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. He is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Family Process and the Encyclopedia of Couple and Family Therapy. He still maintains an active psychotherapy practice, treating individuals, couples, and families. He's made seminal contributions to the field, particularly in areas of psychotherapy integration, common factors, bridging research and practice. He may be best known, however, as a preeminent articulator of the fields of couple and family therapy on the same level of sophistication as our eminent family therapist, couples therapist, Lynn Hoffman. Jay, welcome to our show, and we look forward to spending an hour hearing about your work.
Thank you for having me.
So can you start us off by giving us some idea of how you got involved in this very difficult part of psychotherapy? I remember trying to do it when I was first in training and just feeling totally out of balance. I was learning analytic therapy and it just didn't work. So I'd like to know how you got there.
I am a therapist of a certain age, and I started out as a cognitive behavioral therapist, actually behavioral therapist, because those were two different forms of therapy when I started. So I started out as a behavioral therapist. I was then trained as a rational emotive therapist, which is sort of a cognitive therapist, right? I mean, it's those are sort of analogous. And I went on my internship, and I did a good deal of therapy, and there was something about the exclusive focus on the individual that just did not seem right to me, did not seem useful. I had a broad background in psychology. Social psychology seemed essential to me. All forms of individual therapy seemed to sort of not pay much attention to social psychology. People all live in families. One thing that one notices when you do therapy is that you're doing therapy with a person, but the therapy you do has an impact not only on that person, but on the people around that person. So I got super interested in what was then the emerging field of family therapy. And there were all of these brilliant people who had put together these formulations for how to work with families. A whole, there were maybe a dozen different schools of family therapy that were prominent. I'm really interested in them. I went and studied with several of the people who were kind of treatment developers, and then I went. My first position postdoctoral was as a clinician. I did a lot of therapy, and I decided to go in Chicago. There's a place called, it's actually the same place I work at. It was called the Family Institute of Chicago, now the Family Institute at Northwestern. And they had a 2-year postdoctoral training program, and I went through the program. And that just furthered my excitement and interest in couple and family therapy, and that's how I got started with it, and basically shifted my focus to couples and families. Though I should add, I never at the Family Institute, we have a pretty integrative notion of couple and family therapy. So it does not rule out the importance of individual work and therapy. It's just seen as a part of a systemic way of working.
Great. Does this the working with one member of the couple or family rely on having one person, one of the people in the group, responding to the emotional state of the person who was talking before them? Do you use the flow of emotions around the room as the vehicle for getting the work done, or something else? Or am I asking a totally off the wall question?
Well, family therapy is it's a format. Yes. Its foundation is a systemic worldview. Systemic worldview is about, you see problems in relation to people's relationships with others. That doesn't mean that the others are causal in the problem. It just means that you see things in the context of the units in which people live.
So Jay, is this based on Ludwig von Burton Lanfe's system theory? Is that kind of the classic volume?
Yeah, fine. Well, foundational. That's a good addition here. Foundational to family systems theory is general systems theory, right? Which is, a foundational kind of set of ideas about how things work. General systems theory was about the entire world, right? It's about physics, biology, whatever. And then that migrated into versions that were about family systems. Yes. So in the context of that, to go back to Michael's question, so in the context of that, what the systems view is, you're thinking about people in relation to each other and the issues that are going on kind of in the family. And in my way of working with families, that's an entry point. Then you do some sort of formulation and ask yourself, okay, what's going on with this family and what might be helpful to them, right? So often that has to do then with the emotional process that's going on between family members and speaking to that emotion. In fact, Michael, I would say more times than not, that is the stuff of the therapy, right? But family therapy is a format and a general way of seeing problems. So let me go back to my cognitive training, right? I mean, it may be about helping family members who are living with somebody with a major mental illness figure out how to live with that person with a major mental illness, and how have the person with the mental illness figure out how to live with their families, right? In fact, that example that I just gave you is an example of where somebody might treat a person completely individually, right? But on the other hand, there's still the question of like, so what's the systemic meaning of what's going on in the individual therapy, right? How does it impact on the family? How's the family impact on the person? In more than a few cases, somebody gets some really good therapy from somebody and the family rejects it. Right? They go to an exposure therapist, right? Who somebody's anxious and the therapy is about exposure, the sort of, evidence-based 101 therapy, right? And the family said, no, don't go out. Don't go out. We last time you went out, it didn't go very well, right? So yeah. So it's a matter of getting a formulation about what's going on in this family that might be useful. No?
I have a question.
Sure.
Given that times have changed so much, how have you seen the dynamics of the family therapy sessions change or evolve over time? Especially since there's just been so much, not just happening within the world, but kind of what happens with people, social media, and how people view therapy. So how have you seen that impact on the family sessions or
Oh,
dynamics that occur?
such a good question.
Mhm.
The family therapy is a form of therapy, sort of waxes and wanes in
Mhm.
popularity in relation to how the culture is, right? So there are cultures that are very family systems oriented, very easy there to do family therapy. There are cultures that are very individually oriented. Those are much harder to do family therapy, harder to create the structures that create the basis for family therapy, right? Where people call up and say, I want family therapy, right?
Right.
We're living today, I think, in a very individually centered era in the United States. And in that context, people think they'll call up and they'll say, fix my child. My child has whatever, right? Let's
Mhm.
get them some treatment. You see them, right? You see
Right.
them meeting. I don't want to come in. I want you to do something with them, right? And similarly, somebody will call up for therapy and will mostly think about themselves. The most frequent place that people call up for units is couples. Couples almost always call up for as units for these days. I'm fond of saying that even Better Health advertises relationship therapy as maybe their number one
Better Help, you mean?
go-to. What?
Better Help, is that the name of the?
Yeah, Better Health, right? Did I say that incorrectly?
You said Better Health, did you mean Better
No,
Health?
no, I meant what? What is it called?
The teletherapy company,
Yeah,
Better
right.
It's better help.
Better
Better
Help.
Health. Sorry for my naming.
So
Yeah.
then how do you engage these systems? How do you engage them in a way that gets them into your office?
One needs a skillful therapist. Well, let me go back to what I was saying and come back to what you're asking. So what I was saying is it's all about culture. So there are cultures it's very easy to get families in some cultures, right?
Right.
Yes. And the people think units, they think we need some help. The parent thinks, but I want to be part of that treatment. So there are a lot of people, it's quite easy. I mean, that's what they're asking for. But your question is, based on what I was just saying, is what do you do when, say, the mom just calls and says, see my child? You do two things. First of all, you try to get a first meeting that includes more than just one person.
Mhm.
Okay, so that you have the possibility of engaging with
Yeah.
more than one person,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
Usually at the front end of psychotherapy, people are fairly easily influenced, and if you ask them to come in, they usually are quite willing to come in. Okay. Second, we have the skillfulness of the therapist, right? Because if all the therapist does is say, okay, yeah, okay, you don't want to come, well, I'll see your son. Then of course that's what gets laid down and that's what happens. But a skillful family therapist becomes good at ways of reaching out to other family members and engaging them. And the arguments for that are fairly easy arguments, right? They usually do have a stake in how the other family members are doing. They usually are concerned about whoever it is that's calling. Yes. Okay, and so lots of people, it isn't so much a battle to get them to come in. Now, there are some people who they're not psychotherapy people. They don't want to come in, and then we get to another level of skillfulness, where really good systemic therapists find ways to help people get over that block about entering into the therapy. One thing that we do at the Family Institute, which I think is very helpful, is that people often have this old-fashioned vision of family therapy. Everybody in the room all the time. If you're going to come in, you've now made a commitment to weekly for the rest of your life or something, And that's not the vision. The vision is to get to be part of the treatment system. Okay, and you can have a role as participating only now and then when helpful.
Yeah.
Right, so that becomes easier.
So much more
easier
flexibility
to-
than more
Right.
flexibility than often than individual modalities of
Right,
treatment.
and let me just add here that, of course, we've also had the transformation in the last few years, the lots of video therapy that helps get over the largest constraint. Family therapy is difficult to organize to get, let's say your family of four, to get four people in the same place at the same time, in a therapist office, that is structurally difficult. But to get everybody together at 5 o'clock in your home, video, not nearly as hard.
Do you find that this explaining to people how everyone is important to somebody here, so that the importance of the group, of the individuals to the group, is stressed so that you can actually make people feel good about coming and helping each other rather than being on trial for something?
Yes, you're asking you're asking the crucial question here, because it becomes a matter of how do you frame it so that somebody might actually want to come in, right? Yes, and so one of the things that certainly stops people from coming into family therapy is the fear that they're going to get blamed for what goes on in therapy. That's often a complaint actually of family members about individual therapies, right? That the person went to that individual therapy and the family got blamed, right, for the problem. Turning it inside out and framing it as you can be helpful in the solution to this problem, right, is something that most people pretty readily engage with, right? And some with a lot of enthusiasm because they want to be helpful. They're frustrated. People do not come into these forms of therapy, idly. The family members have lived with whatever it is for some period of time, and given an opportunity to come in with some notion that they might actually be helpful. It's for many people it's a not so hard sell to them.
Do you find, and then I'm going to just ask this one and stop for a bit, but do you find that um, there's a sizable number of people who, within the family, have a great deal of power because of their um, angry behavior with the other family members? And so that everybody's tiptoeing around, or everybody's afraid that if they say the wrong thing, that they're going to pay for it later when they go home. What do you do with that kind of thinking? Because it's usually not paranoia. It's usually that you know fireworks are erupting in this family.
Yeah, well, again, you've asked, one of the key questions about the skillfulness of a family therapist, or a couple therapist for that matter. Um, to do the work, difficult things have to get in the conversation. Then it becomes, how do you get the difficult things in the conversation in a way that doesn't result in negative ramifications, right? I'm very fond of saying to my trainees, uh, people I train, it's supposed to be therapy, right? It's a very important. Supposed to like be moving ahead, right? We're not talking about trying to create events that are going to be regressive for people. All right. So how to do that and how to do it, you're asking, as I said, a really good question. How do you do it in the context of where not only might feelings get heated, but where somebody might sort of then take those feelings, take them home and use them to justify some negative behavior. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, so that has something to do with, first of all, trying to keep temperature of the meeting in the right zone, right? And that may sound like that's the family's responsibility, but the therapist
Yes,
has to be the regulator
yeah,
of that.
yeah,
That doesn't mean, your world's
I
best family
agree.
therapist and somebody's out of control, they're out of control. But then you say, well, wait a minute, like, does it make sense to assemble this unit again until we've done some more work with the members so that they might actually be able to be in the room and do something therapeutic with each other?
Yes,
Again, it's the formulation for me is always essential there, right? So you get feedback, you do things. My old colleague Bill Pinzoff used to say, therapy is a series of experiments, right? So you've done an experiment, that experiment failed. That's not terrible. The important thing is to learn from the experiment.
get the
Okay,
data.
that didn't work.
Yeah.
Let's learn from it. Okay, so we're not going to put Maggie and Joni in the room together because they just go at each other until we've created enough skillfulness in some way that they can actually be in some kind of not awful conversation. Not to be, let me just be clear here. They don't, this doesn't have to be sunshine and light and all kind of nice reflective listening and whatever. But it's got to be within some limit, right?
Yes.
To actually have the possibility is that this unit can serve
Transformation, yeah.
as the core foundation for something that's therapeutic.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I'm a systems trained person. I also went through a 2-year family therapy training early in my career and am a certified marriage and family therapist. So I often mix modalities, individual, couples, family. And I'm wondering what your thought is on that, because I know some therapists that I relate to and talk to say, well, I won't, I'm doing couples work, so I won't see someone individually, or I'm doing individual work, so I'm not going to do couples work. And I think that kind of rigidity can be unproductive and you miss a lot of data. But on the other end of the kind of the spectrum is, what do you think the contraindications are for someone like me who says, why don't you bring your partner in? Or, we've been doing individual for a while and you keep talking about your marital issues or your family issues. Do you think? And then the talk is about, so are you going to be our therapist for that too? What are your thoughts about contraindications for mixing modalities the way I do in this stew?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll just start to say I'm in probably a very similar place than you are in terms of the ballpark. Having said that, in terms of your question about contraindications, rules exist for reasons, right? Rules are often rigid, yes. So, uh, perhaps unnecessarily rigid and can not be so beneficial, but they exist for reasons. And certainly if you're going to do, let's say you started with one person and you're adding the spouse, it's couple therapy, right?
Mhm.
Then you have to consider that the person who's coming in has not been your client,
Right.
and the person who has been there has been your client, but now this other person is now your client.
Mhm.
Okay, so you'd have to be able to do that in some way that you move your loyalty from your client, number one, to now the clients,
Yes.
number one and number two, right? And you'd have to be able to do that. And not only would you have to be able to do it, you have to be able to do it in a way that their fantasy is that you're
Right, they're transference stuff, right?
balance
Like
and
they
fit,
expect that
right?
you're not going to be able to
Yeah.
understand or take their side because
Yeah.
of their own transference feelings of you feeling like you're already allied with them
Yeah.
and you're not going to care about me. And I think it opens up very interesting discussions, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly what you just said, right? It becomes transference material, and if somebody's going to go into it thinking you're on the other person's side, no couple therapy, okay?
Right.
So now, having said that, and go back to your basic treatise here, which I'm with, right? If I'm seeing a couple, or for that matter, an individual for that matter, and they want to add their spouse, I already know a lot about
Yes,
about
yes,
these people.
yes.
And we often have I often sit and hear about supervision or whatever other context. Somebody's done this great work with this couple, and now they got this person who they've got a great alliance with, but they don't want to see them alone
Yes. Yeah.
because it should be an individual therapist who can start new with them, right?
Yes.
Except that person's going to take a year to get the alliance with them.
That's
You have,
exactly the feedback that I've gotten over the
right.
decades,
So,
that people say, you
yeah.
already know me and you know a lot about what's going on. The feedback that I've gotten is they would much rather not start with someone new. Now, there are certain times when there are contraindications, if it's a bitter divorce or something like that. But what are the other contraindications of me mixing my modalities in my modalities too?
What are some other contraindications?
Yeah, what are some other contraindications for my modalities still, where I mix individual, couples, family, and I weave back and forth depending on where they are in their life cycle and so forth?
Well, I've named the alliance,
Right.
alliance
Yeah,
piece,
got that.
the alliance piece.
Yeah.
Beyond the alliance piece, I'm uh, uh, you have the question of is this mixture going to add to your work with the whatever unit you were starting with, or subtract from that?
Okay.
Is it going to interfere with it? Right. It's one thing to have completed your work with a couple, say, and now see this individual. It's another thing to literally interrupt your work with the couple to see the individual. Now, I'm saying you wouldn't ever do that, right? But it's just a matter of the question of, can you keep the work going that you already have going, right? There's a certain kind of thing that we might all get in which you say, oh, I can do everything with these people, right? And so I think it's a matter of asking the objective question: is this additive, or might I be subtracting in some way? But again, I want to highlight in terms of my answer, I'm mostly with you in terms of your basic premise, which is that mostly, if you do this carefully, it is additive, right? And it's often the case that if you see a couple and you have individual meetings with each member of the couple, you move things ahead in that way, as long as you can keep some kind of balance
Mhm.
the couple.
Yes.
So you're trying to keep the balance in this very complex system, and you know are trying to understand what's going on and how you're going to get people to feel that they're adding something of importance here for them and the other people, or either or. It's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of variables churning. Um, it's quite different from many therapies, which are focus, 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 focus. Get kind of get it down under
Yes.
some tiny piece and work there, and then build out. So, what makes this the model you've chosen?
Yeah.
Because it's different.
Yeah, another great question, because it's like, actually, it was reminding me of, Jeff was asking about the history of this, or reminding me that one of the reasons that I thought that cognitive behavioral therapy was very, very effective. I never had a question about its effectiveness. It was repeating the same thing over and over again, right? In different contexts. And in terms of the question you're just asking, Michael, hey, you go into a family session, you go to a couple session, so much happens in 5 minutes, right? I mean, it's not, there is nothing rote about it. I mean, you try to bring, I think if you're good at it, you try to bring some themes into the meetings that are consistent, where people learn things, right? And you go back and you're helping them sort of master certain basic, let's call them socio emotional skills, huh? Yeah. But on the other hand, it's in the context of so much happening, like things are moving around. There's endless things to respond to, right? And so back, in terms of your question, there was just something about the liveliness of it that is such a pull for me. Such a pull for me.
Do you share this in a way that helps them appreciate it the same way?
I tried.
Okay.
I
So,
try to let
so
them know that, I mean, one thing is that, we can create, one of the side effects of our knowing a lot about kind of what works in terms of communication and families and so on is you can make it seem like family life is supposed to consist of some perfect Rogerian, you know, speaker and listener and dialogue and everything just like pristine and perfect, right? And I think you try to communicate to people that that part of family life is being with each other, right? And experiencing each other and experiencing the range of emotion. And sometimes it's very painful emotion. It's not always pleasurable, right?
oh
And
yeah,
there's something in witnessing each other's emotion. So I think there's something about some great value in explicitly saying that out loud, right? Right. Helping people, you know, so
the
Oh, we
giving
have a
so
question.
support.
We have a question from one of our viewers, from Ken. Thank you for your sharing your wisdom. I'm curious if you think a couple doing individual internal family systems therapy would be a reasonable substitute for the kind of therapy which you practice.
You mean each doing their own? Is that what you mean? Is that the version of internal family systems therapy that he means? I'm going to presume that, okay?
Yeah.
That you're talking about, because internal family systems therapy can be a way of seeing couples together, right? Right. But if what you mean is that they would each be having their own therapy and not be in the room with each other, I would say, why wouldn't you have them in the room with each other? They're a couple, they've got a couple issues.
Mhm.
again, it may be very valuable for, you know, I mean, what's the best therapy in the world? The best therapy is multimodal, right? Where you know, everybody can go for their own therapies, and we can have every subsystem. You know, husband and wife go together, and the family goes together, and you know, I mean, those things all could, you know, my old mentors, David Orlinsky and Ken Howard, used to, you know, highlight that that therapy is also individual education. It's about personal growth. All these things are helpful. Okay. All right.
And I
But
and
having
I
said that, can I just go back to the question? I'm sorry, but I just go back to the question that if you're seeing if it's a couple problem, why would you not have them together in some meetings to talk with each other about what it is that
Yeah.
they're learning and how it impacts on how they're working together?
I think that that's what I was trying to think of as well. And it's like, well,
Mhm.
and my question would be, what would be the hesitation of the resistance to having the family session, you know, because, you know, that, I mean, and that's what the system's all about, the family. And so there's some resistance somewhere. So I guess that would be something that I would want to explore.
Mhm. Mhm.
So do you ever then, building on that as a part of
Mhm.
getting people to work together, explain how sometimes something hurts so much that people pull away, but that causes a secondary problem. How do you help each other when you see that somebody is really struggling? Uh, Billy, your uncle, is um, you know, can't seem to stop his drug use. So, is it drinking, and it's stealing mom's money and stuff. You know, got this impossible situation in a way. You know, 40 years of this, and now they're here for treatment.
Yeah, so you're talking about situations here that are really kind of the wheelhouse for family therapy. I mean, these are the places where one can argue for a lot of things, maybe this therapy, maybe that therapy. When you have somebody who's, you know, a family member who is in some way out of control or has some severe um, mental illness going on, um, families tend to be they tend to get depleted. They tend to get demoralized. They don't know what to do. The legal system makes it next to impossible to even get information, let alone you know, do something helpful, right?
Mhm.
Right. Laws that are laws have been passed for good reason to protect individual autonomy, but putting families in the position of we know our son is suicidal and nobody, you know, we can't do anything about it. So you know, these are situations that are that uh, it one tries to get the family together to process what's going on. It is usually not very hard to get the family together without the person with the problem, because they're motivated usually, right? It's harder to get them together with the person with the problem, because that person has to be willing to participate, and one presumes from the story, I mean, from the question, that that person is mostly in, you know, the I don't have a problem stage of change, right? So again, that gets back to the therapist's skillfulness in terms of engaging people, right? But it's often very helpful to at least begin with the family members who can get a coalition together and try to figure out some way to differentiate themselves from the problem, right? And to at least do what is, at least to not make it worse. Yeah,
Mhm.
yes, they may not be able to fix it, but at least, figure out how to work together and how to have some good sense of mutual support as they try to be helpful.
Jennifer, you had a important question, I think, that you wanted to ask about
Right.
secondary gain.
Yes, and I was thinking about the kind of work that I do. I'm a clinical health psychologist. And one of the things that I see is just the impact of these medical conditions on the family. And so the question that I have is, how do you, I mean, you want to be supportive of the person who's experiencing that condition, but you want them to be as functional as possible. So how do you balance that support for them without reinforcing the sick behaviors and yeah, reinforcing that and also reinforcing the secondary gain that could occur, like what are they benefiting from being disabled and being dysfunctional? So how do you approach that within that in the family situation? I do a lot of individual therapy with that population, but I see the impact of it, and I know that there are so many family challenges with that. So how do you approach that? And you talked about your initial training being cognitive behavior therapy or rational emotive therapy. Is I was thinking about how that could fit into that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, so again, here's a place where family work, couple work is just a
Mhm.
natural fit, because you don't find a family or couple where the person who's living with the other person doesn't have all sorts of feelings and all sorts of um, ramifications, based on what's going on with the
Mhm.
person with the illness, right? Uh,
Right.
my colleague John Rowland has written a couple of books and uh, uh, has talked for a very long time about the essence of of working at this interface and getting the unit to sort of think of themselves as the carrier of the treatment, right? By the way, it isn't only in relation to the illness, right,
Mhm.
or the person with the illness. Almost by definition, you're now in the healthcare system, right? With all the things that go with being in the healthcare system, right? Um, uh, having a very severely ill person or person with health limitations is inevitably an invitation to endless. The insurance company will pay for this, but they won't pay for that, and all sorts of things that are very very distressing that the family has to deal with.
You're talking about like the allostatic load that brings, but I think, Jennifer, are you asking about like how you actually deal with the patient who may be getting secondary gain in like a family modality? Is
Right.
that
And how do and how do
Oh,
you navigate those secondary gain issues in the family therapy
okay.
situation? Yes.
I'm sorry. I
Mhm.
misunderstood the um, the the. So we're talking about working with people where actually one person is getting some benefit out of this social position they have in relation to their partner.
And
Yes.
we will assume that the
And
secondary benefit is
yeah,
unconscious.
and how yeah. I mean, I said at the beginning of this meeting that I think family is systemic is a way of seeing things, yes. But
Mhm.
then within that, you have a formulation, and if your formulation is that in the context of this particular problem, the partner's way of relating is in fact um, uh, uh, unhelpful and is uh, um, getting in the way of progress, yes, then I think we start with psychoeducation about what's helpful. As you were asking me, when you asked the question, I think it's an easy progression to some kind of working on self-talk about what it is that you're
Mhm.
thinking about the problem, right? Helping the two of them recognize what's going on in terms of this process, right? Yes, because again, the framing is so important. Nobody wants, nobody, not many people want to explicitly be seen as um, um, malingering or being less functional than they might be.
Right.
Very few people would want to be seen that way, right? So how to engage with them in some sort of sense of considering possibilities for things being different, huh? Yes, and as I said, starting with psychoeducation, that dynamic you named is bad for both of the people in the interaction, right?
Right.
Or it's good for them in some way.
Easy to cite a lot of evidence that it's bad for both of them.
Or it's good for them in some way.
Say what?
Or it's good for them in some way, right? They're getting something out of it. Otherwise, they
Thank you. Thank you for helping me with the language. Yeah, it depends on what we're talking about. So, but in terms of what I meant is that in a rational world,
Right.
considering things like like uh, uh, the likelihood of getting depressed, the likelihood of having more days that you feel sick, the likelihood of getting demoralized. It is just not good and helpful to be in either of these positions, right? It is not. But Jeff, you remind us, and it's good you're reminding us because it's a part of what I believe in as well, that when we do therapy, we're intervening at a variety of levels.
Right.
So there's a level of behavior, yeah, but there's these other levels, and sometimes, often, of course, if we lived in a perfectly rational world, this would all everything would make sense.
Right.
But people are driven by a lot of different sorts
Right.
of.
So like if you have an illness and
Mhm.
I feel my esteem is improved by being a caretaker
Yeah,
to you,
sure.
I'm getting something out of that
Yeah,
recipe
yes,
process, right? I'm feeling like I can um, take care of you, and maybe also
yeah,
if you're really dependent on me, you'll never leave me. You'll never
yes,
abandon me because you're can't take care of yourself. So I'm going to make sure that I'm going to encourage you to be as dependent on me as possible because I am terrified that you would abandon me if you weren't so dependent on me. So there are all these.
yeah,
Right.
terrific,
Right.
terrific. Yeah,
And
go
I
ahead.
see the dynamics just going all over the place with that. And that would be one of the dynamics that I would see. The other one is that this is not what I signed up for, especially when
Mhm.
they develop this illness
Mm,
over, after they've been married for a period of
yeah,
time.
yeah.
It's like, what do you mean for better, for worse? Wait a minute. I was just saying that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. So again, let me put the plug in for systemic sort of
Yeah.
therapies, right? The plug is that we now have not just the one person in the room, we have both the members of the couple in the
Mhm.
room, all right? And while those are advantages that Jeff, that you were just talking about, right? On the other hand, there are advantages that like have a certain intrinsic problem wrapped in with them, right? And there is the possibility in meeting with, say, the couple there, right, that you might not only help that the person with the disorder of like figuring out how to maybe function better, you might be able to help the partner with whatever their core issue is that is keeping them from what would be like a more, what would you call it, healthier way of relating, right? A
Right,
way of
right,
feeling good about their partner's advance, right?
right.
Yes.
And that mean, you know, that those sorts of issues often loom, right? They often loom when people can't even begin to see them at the beginning of therapy, right? So here's a place where with the system you have the possibility of that happening. Oh, let me add one more thing, especially in terms of Jennifer's comment. Um, People often don't start out with these kind of dynamics. They develop them over time, right? In terms of Jennifer's question, okay, now I have to, okay, I've been living with them for 3 years,
Right.
and you just, you develop some ways that are not so functional just because that's your way of adapting to the circumstance based on who you are, right?
Right.
Yeah, so the great thing about the systems therapies is they offer you the opportunity to help each of them to function better. And in the, in the systemic paradigm, we're trying to turn it around from dysfunction leads to dysfunction leads to dysfunction, conflict leads to conflict with a conflict,
Mm-hmm.
to processes where I'm doing better helps you doing better helps me doing better, right?
Right.
So that's the
Yes.
idea.
So, Jay, I would like to hear your thoughts about one of the pioneers in family therapy, Murray Bowen,
Mhm.
who talked about what I consider probably two of the most useful concepts in
Mhm.
psychotherapeutics, which is self, other, and emotional differentiation, two different phenomena. And I'm wondering, do you feel the same way I do about those two constructs? And if so, how do you think they fit into the work that we do, emotional differentiation and self-other differentiation? What's your understanding of the contribution that those
Yeah,
processes have?
let me answer in this way that that work with family systems prompts conversation about what matters in family processes, right?
Mhm.
And there are two really big constructs. One of the two is the Bowenian construct of differentiation, right? Meaning I kind of can separate myself enough in a psychological way from what he called the
Family mass.
undifferentiated ego mask is what he called it, a great name for it. Yeah. The other is attachment, which Sue Johnson certainly is in the couple family field been the one major proponent of it, Peter Fonagy, other folks, and an attachment is like the core importance of some kind of core uh, connectedness with others. Okay, so I would say in answer to your question, like to consider differentiation independent of everything else is a problem, because if what it comes to mean is you are not attached, I don't think we're in a very good shape there, right? Yeah. On the other hand, so many people have issues with these issues of fusion, not being able to get enough individual separateness. Not, I mean, this segues to you know, the psychodynamic notion of self, right? And don't have a self that can feel separate and independent. Yeah, that's a huge problem. It's very helpful to help people figure out how to separate themselves, or yes, as long as they stay attached. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so so yeah, it's a very valuable concept, differentiation, if considered in the broader context. Yeah.
So this has been intriguing to think how you take so many of these very difficult things and try to get people to appreciate how they're going to be helped by this, how it's going to be important all the way around. I don't know if I'm simplifying it too much, but it seems like that's often missing in psychotherapy. That there's very little is focused on keeping that dyad healthy, keeping that person feeling um, not pushed, helping them feel cared about.
Mhm. You mean in the systems in which they live? Is that,
Yes.
yeah, right. One way, I think one fault thing that is fairly easy, at least from my perspective, to fault American individual psychotherapy is it can become completely centered on the one person. And
Yes.
but that person lives in systems,
Mhm.
and what happens with that person matters. You know, when one person decides to move to Alaska and leave their partner and kids behind, uh, it may make perfect sense to that person in their head, but then the question is, what is the impact on the other people, right? And again, I'm not trying to say anything simple-minded about, you know, that person shouldn't do it. I just mean to say that one needs to consider the system in which people live, right, as foundational, right? In fact, one of the things we do at the Family Institute, just to highlight here, is that when people do individual therapy, that is, they're meeting with one person at a time, right?
Mhm.
I want to go in and talk with somebody about me. Yeah. We strongly support that people keeping a systemic perspective. Yeah. Um, and understanding what the impact of the work not only is on that person, but on the people around that person. Right. Good, really good psychotherapy does that anyway, right? Really good psychotherapy is, you know, like one person's making positive changes and they're very likely to have positive effects on those around them. So there's not an indictment of the field of psychotherapy, but kind of it requires thought, and it is a place where a good, even very excellent therapist might miss paying too much attention to that, right?
So
Yeah.
one of my colleagues often tells the people that we work with that just as we go to the gym to exercise to get physically healthy, we need to exercise in the psychological gym.
Mhm.
And psychological gym, in my understanding, is in the what I think it was what was that Scharf called the family crucible. In relationships, we are
Sure.
psychologically exercising, and that's where we learn how to mentalize, how to get self-other differentiation, how to get
Mhm.
emotional differentiation, and in our society, I think gets back to what you were saying, Jennifer. Now that we're all now addicted to online stuff, we don't have the same
Mhm.
experiences with exercising in the
Oh,
psychological gym that I think allows us to get resilient and healthy.
Right.
Is that something that makes sense to you, Jay?
Yeah, I love your metaphor. It's just a brilliant metaphor. And yes, one thing that has really changed in our world is that people have not may have lived in, you know, in dysfunctional families, but they lived in families and they were relating to others, and that process was ongoing. However it was working, it was ongoing. And today there are young people have been raised in a world, the last, generation of people have been raised where the most frequent thing you look at is your iPhone, right? So it becomes quite different. Your iPhone is usually very friendly and doesn't push on you in a variety of ways. And yes, I think therefore your tool may not be as tuned, right? And
Yes.
how to help people tune it, because we do know a lot about these things.
Yes.
We
Yes.
have 100 years of research about families and functioning and whatever that people can draw on if they can properly draw on it. And let me add one last thing here, is that the internet poses all sorts of information, and some of it is incorrect, right? So it offers the possibility people can learn about things, right? But they can also learn about bad
Yes.
things that are not correct, right? And come in absolutely convinced that their partner has X disorder.
I am sad to say we have run out of time.
Mhm.
Dr. Jay Lebow, thank you for
Mhm.
sharing your expertise, your wisdom, your knowledge with us. Thank you to my co-host. Welcome to Jennifer. And thank you, Michael, and all our viewers. Jay, we hope to have you back someday because there's so much more that you can share and teach us about. We will
Definitely on
hang in
course.
it. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.